So first of all, welcome to this joint event with TDSIG and BRAZ-TESOL, BRAZ-TESOL Brasilia and TDSIG. Before we get started, I would like to introduce Joyce Fettermann, who will be talking about enhancing adult learners' critical literacy through projects pedagogy. Joyce holds a master's and a PhD from UENF. She has been in ELT since 2007 and has worked as an academic consultant at Troika in São Paulo for the past 3 years. She also teaches English for academic purposes, and her research interests include multiliteracies, multimodality, PBL, and assessment. And thank you very much, Joyce, for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Marcus. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming here. I'm Joyce. And you might have heard some fireworks. It's because I live here in the neighborhood of Palmeiras. I don't know if you are familiar with this championship that they are playing today in Abu Dhabi, if I'm not mistaken. So people are on fire here today. So I'm sorry if you hear screams or fireworks and so on. Well, just like Marcus said, I'm a teacher, right? An English teacher, and I also work at Troika as an academic consultant. I don't know if you know about the work we do, but just a little about it. We work with teacher development. We provide courses for teachers, for managers in general, and we also produce educational materials. So if you want to know a little more about the work that we do, just visit our page on Instagram or our website. You can also meet me on Instagram. It will be a pleasure to be in contact with you. So today I'm going to talk about enhancing adult learners' critical literacy through projects pedagogy, which is actually part of the work that I do, actually that I did last year, because I'm going to show to you some things related to this work with grad students at a public university here in Brazil. Don't know why I can't share. Okay. But before I start, I would like to know where you are from, where you are now, actually. Can you tell me in the chat? I can see some familiar names here. Brasilia, Ribeirão Preto, hi Yuri, Gustavo, Porto Alegre, Campinas, very nice. Hi. Okay, very nice to see you here. Thank you so much for coming to Tent B. I know there is another talk in Tent A. It's a pleasure to be here. So just for you to know what I'm going to go through this evening, we are going to talk a little about projects pedagogy, a project that I developed with my students last year, the Antiracist Manuals, and redesign as a formative assessment tool, which is part of my research. So I've tried to implement this tool in my lessons since last year, right? So why developing these projects with grad students? It's very common to see teachers and teacher educators talking about the importance of projects with kids and teens, for example, and it is very important, no doubt. But developing projects with adults can be a huge challenge, especially in this academic context, right? because the students actually, students from a graduation course at graduate levels, they tend to develop, they are used to developing a lot of research projects. But when you come up with this idea of bringing them projects, language projects, pedagogical projects, they kind of, what is it? So why developing these with them? I really liked what was said in the first plenary, because it is very aligned with what I'm going to show here and with my philosophy of work. So developing these kind of projects with these students was a way of bringing to them socially relevant topics to discuss and to think about, because we usually think about socially topics in other contexts, but when it comes to the academic life, the academic environment, sometimes we don't have time to focus on these types of things. So the idea here was provoking students so that they would think out of the box as well. I really like the definition of projects brought by Oliveira, Tinoco, and Santos. They are 3 researchers here in Brazil from the Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Norte. And they say that the projects can bring us closer to time, space, and social practices. And as a consequence, this can bring a new look at the academic community. And this was exactly what I meant, what I thought about bringing this idea of working with projects with my grad students. I was a scholar, a visiting scholar last year at the University of the Northern Rio de Janeiro. We call UENF, Norte Fluminense, in Campos dos Goitacazes. And I really wanted them to look at the academic community from a different perspective. That is why I thought of bringing projects for them to develop this, not only the linguistic competence, but also digital competence and this possibility of discussing socially relevant topics in the classroom. So Dave Willis and Jane Willis, who are very important people in ELT, they talk about doing task-based teaching. So they define projects highlighting some important features of this kind of work. So they say that the projects are basically a sequence of tasks based around a specific topic. They also mention that each task has an outcome or a purpose, right? So it is important to think about what we want the students to produce by the end of the project. The project culminates in a specified end product, which is very connected to the previous idea. And they are done collaboratively or individually to solve a problem. This is a very important part of working with projects here, that we should start from a problem. And if we have a problem, we should have a driving question that would guide all the tasks, all the activities, everything that is developed during the project. So if I have, for example, let's think about an example, a problem. A student is having problems using the materials in class because he or she or they have a visual impairment. So this is a problem. We have a student with visual impairment in the classroom who is having difficulties using the materials. So what could be a driving question for this problem that would help us lead all the work done in the project? I would like to hear from you, okay, here in the chat box. Could you try to think of an example of driving question based on this problem? The problem is we have a student in the classroom who has visual impairment, and this student is having problems using the materials that the school provides. While you're thinking, and this is not an easy thing, right, to come up with, I have a suggestion. Maybe we could ask, how can we help? How can we adapt the material so that this student feels included in the class, right? So this is just one idea. So based on this driving question, we can build a very successful project, right? And all the tasks will be developed around the problem and the driving question. We have some suggestions here. Maybe something like, how can we make the materials more accessible to the student? Excellent. What strategies can we use to help the students make full use of the class materials? Excellent ideas. Thank you, Vitor and Marcos. So these questions or the driving question that we choose will be like the thing that will help us direct all the tasks developed during the project, right? And it is very interesting that this driving question will not only help us think about the product that we want the students to develop, but also think about how to scaffold all the tasks, all the activity, everything that is done in the classroom, right, during the project. So one thing that I used was this learning, the knowledge processes, actually, by Calantzis and Co. And they mention in their learning by design theory, they mention these processes, which are experiment, conceptualize, analyze, and apply. They say that the knowledge, they say that the knowledge should be organized around the processes, these processes, right? And I really like this idea of organizing. This is not a closed idea. It's not something that we should follow under these steps, because they actually don't call these steps, right? But they are just processes that can be used to help students organize their knowledge, the way that they construct knowledge. So in this project and in the other ones that I developed with my students, I added another process, which is assess. And assessment here is something that is done not only by the teacher, but also by the peers. So students can self-assess their productions and also help each other assess their knowledge, the way that they're building their knowledge, right? So here I included assessment as something that can be done at any time during their knowledge production, and not only by the teacher. If you scan this code, you're going to find this project, Antiracist Manuals, which was actually the first project that I developed with my students last year. It was developed not only with grad students, but also with undergrad students. And it was very interesting to see the differences concerning thinking, organization of these knowledge processes in all of the groups, right? But if you scan it, you're gonna see how it was organized. But let me show you, I'm gonna show to you, I'm just gonna stop sharing here so I can show the web page. Well, here is the project, the Antiracist Manual. It follows the knowledge processes, as I said. So in the first moment, the students would explore the topic Black Lives Matter and the genre manual. Why manual? Because the whole idea around the project became from Jamila Ribeiro's book, Pequeno Manual Antirracista. And we wanted to investigate racism and anti-racism a little closer. So we started by exploring the topic, Black Lives Matter, the movement, and trying to help students think of this genre in a different perspective, because we explored the types of manuals that they know, what kind of information we can have in a manual. And also after that, after investigating the Black Lives Matter, what the movement was, why it happened, where it started, and how it became larger, right? So students had to think about the benefits of having a manual about these issues related to this movement. After that, in a second moment, students would conceptualize racism from discussions, right? So students in groups, in breakout rooms, they would try to bring their own perspectives on the matter. So it was very interesting because at the same time that I had white people who had never been through such problems, we had people who shared their own experiences, and it was so rewarding, right? So everyone was listening to each other, to the situations that they had been through, and it was really good. So from that, both groups could discuss the topic and try to find a definition for that. In the third moment, the analyze moment, so we would understand racism from the author's perspective. Which authors? Jamila Ribeiro, who brings some tips, some suggestions for being anti-racist, and Ibrahim Kendi, who is a North American author who also discusses the subject. So both of them bring different ideas that actually combine, right, about how to be anti-racist. And the idea here actually came from what Angela Davis says, that it is not enough to not to be racist, but we should be anti-racist. So from that perspective, and from the author's ideas, students started checking some ways for being anti-racist. And that was the moment when they were introduced to language, to some kind of language, because they started investigating, observing the author's ideas, and then they would see how to give suggestions, some ideas of how to give suggestions. So they started seeing imperatives, modal verbs, and clause of purposes on the suggestions that the authors gave. So from that, students should say that they agreed or not with the author's tips, why not, or why they agreed. And then from that, in another moment, and it's important to know here that this is not something to do in just one lesson, of course, right? Because it's a dense topic to discuss, and there is much information for them to investigate and for them to discuss and for them to learn, right? So in the apply moment, after seeing all of them, all of the ideas, the previous ideas, they would then come up with their own ideas about how they could stand up against racism, prejudice, discrimination, and these practices nowadays, right? So we did an activity in Slice, which is an online board. I don't know if I just share here, if you can see. Can you see my slides, Marcos? Everyone?
Yeah, I can see, because you're showing the project, right? Is that what you mean?
No, the project with the slides. No?
What I can see, what I can
No
see
problem.
is the project, like the description of the project and the different steps. Oh,
Yes.
now I can see the slide.
Now we can?
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. So here, in that apply moment, students would then, oh my God, what is happening? Students did this activity in an online board called Slice. I don't know if you know it. It's a very nice tool to work with, because the students, just like Padlet, right? Students can type ideas, then they can like the other people's ideas as well. So students joined some ideas, they gathered some ideas here. At this stage, I wasn't concerned about mistakes, right? Although some of them were constantly correcting themselves and helping each other, but that wasn't a concern, because I really wanted students to say what they thought about the topic, right? After that, then in another class, they would have a model for you to rephrase their sentences that they wrote previously on Slice, right? So the idea here was to give people some advice on how to be anti-racist. So they had to check their previous production and then try to rephrase them according to the models that they received. So they would use the imperatives, they would use the modal verbs and the clause of purpose, so that in order to etc. So I put here on Google Docs an example for them. And then after that, everyone working in the same Google Doc, they could come up with rephrasing of their productions, right? And here, something very interesting that happened was that since the beginning, I was I was telling them that making a mistake is okay, it's fine, it's important for us to learn, right? So students, they were very comfortable actually making mistakes because they knew that they would be provided with some kind of help, not only my help, but also their colleagues. So it was really interesting to see the relationship that they had with mistakes during the whole project, right? And since the beginning. And I think this is something that we should work since the beginning, because we know that some students have a lot of difficulty dealing with mistakes, since kids to adults, right? So it was really interesting to see. And in this moments of feedback that students received, I was always concerned about asking them questions so they would think about their mistakes, and I would not provide them with a correct answer, right? So questions like, how can we, which verb can we use here so that it can mean, no. How can we write this in a different way so that the other people can understand it better? So students were constantly encouraged to think about their mistakes from a different perspective and investigate the language. I think this is a good definition for this moment, because they would investigate. And in this process, they could research, right? So they could search for the grammar topic on the web. I would always tell them that they were free to do that. All right. So after all these tasks that they had to do, both individually and collaboratively, some questions that that came before they produced their end product were, who is the manual for? So since the beginning, they knew that they would produce a manual, like so, right? So they would produce a multimodal manual, right? That they could use anything they felt like visuals, they could use videos, they could use whatever their creativity allowed them to do. So some questions that came up: who is the manual for? What information will it bring, right? And what problem can it help people solve? I don't know why. Okay, now I can. I wasn't able to see the whole, but now I can. What problem can it help us solve? So students were put in groups again, and once again, they had to discuss the matter and their end production so that they would start thinking about it. Let me see here the chat. Yes, Patricia, thank you. I agree with you. Need to be addressed. Yes, Gustavo, totally. Yes. All right. So from that, I could really see that the assessment was something really important in the whole process, right? And I could see clearly the steps, like they experimented on the topic and they could discuss the topic. They could see what other people, experts on the topic would say about it. So they could apply it using the language to talk about that topic, right? And in this process, they would receive feedback, which was constant during the whole process. And from the feedback, they would redesign, they would have the opportunity to redesign their productions, right? And it was not difficult, like I said, for them to acquire, because they felt very comfortable in the classroom, in the process, with this feedback thing, right? What I really, Marcus, can you tell me how much time I have, please?
Oh, you still have 15 minutes.
All right, thank you.
No
So
problem.
what I really saw here, and I think it's kind of my final considerations, is that the assessment was done in a very holistic way. And this is something that I prioritize in my projects with my students, because I really think that we should move from, and we have done it, I have seen many teachers doing that, and Liberali's presentation really showed that. So we should we should move from this grammar-based perspective and start seeing assessment and seeing the language teaching from a different perspective, a more holistic perspective. So here in this case, I could assess the end products, like the students' production, how involved they were in the whole process, their creativity. They were very creative. I'm going to show to you some of the manuals that they produced, and I could see how much language they actually knew, much more than they thought they had, that they knew for that to work. So they were very creative. They used a lot of, they used multimodal media, which were very difficult actually to use. Some students were, they were making videos, they made Padlet presentations, connecting the topic racism and anti-racism to their own areas, which was the idea of the projects, because I told them that they should think about something that would communicate something in their areas. And it was very rich. How they cooperated and collaborated with each other in the whole project, right? Not only creating the manuals, but during the tasks as well. And the language used, which is not in the last place because it's not meaningful, it is. But the main focus here was not only the language use, was everything combined. And something that I really saw and that I really like in this perspective, in this pedagogy, is that we always consider students, the learners, as funds of knowledge. There are many researchers who talk about this, that we should consider students as funds of knowledge. What does it mean? It means that everyone has some cultural knowledge, they have experiences, and they have something that should be considered in our teaching experience, teaching and learning experience. So about this, I remember when I introduced the topic to students, there was a doctorate student. She was studying political sciences, and she was a researcher in the area. Like, she had a lot of knowledge about racism. And she had the book, Jamila's book that we started discussing, and she got very excited that I was bringing to the class something that she was studying. So I could see how, at the same time that I could see doubts in her eyes, because come on, a white woman here talking about racism, what does she have to say? But then I could see how she engaged in the task, in the project, and she saw that it was real, that I really meant it, and that we had a lot of things to share. I was not teaching them nothing about racism. I was there to listen to them. So I think that this attitude is the most important thing, right? When we work with projects, because we are not there to teach students to be the only voice to be heard, but we are there to listen to what they have to say. And she got very happy because I gave her this voice, and she could teach us a lot of different terms that I didn't know about it. And she was very excited. She sent me WhatsApp messages, "Teacher, I'm very excited about this because it's the first time that I can discuss this topic freely in the classroom." So about this, when I see this funds of knowledge theory, I remember her right away, right? Let me see here. Let me show you some of the contributions. Actually here, they're not all of them, because it was worked with different groups, but I can show to you some of the works that were developed. Where is it? Okay. Oops. I can't see it here, but I will open before the end of the presentation. All right, so just for us to wrap up, some highlights of this work were that the projects were seen from a different perspective by the students, because as I told you at the beginning of this talk, graduate students, they often work with projects, but research projects in a different perspective, not in a language class, right? So they could see it in a different perspective. Also, another thing that was really relevant here was that they could discuss topics that were really not only relevant for their learning context, but also socially, right? So the students could see things that they were not used to seeing in their learning context. They also could develop their digital competence because they had to communicate, they had to solve a problem, which was how to suggest anti-racist practices, right? They had to search for a lot of information, they had to create content and everything online. So they used a lot of tools and they had to develop their digital competence as well doing that. And critical literacy was the bond that connected everything here, because they were really able to think about the topic, about the issue that I I brought to them, and also develop them, their attitude towards this very significant topic, and apply that to their academic lives, to their academic context, because they were at the university. This class is offered, the language class, the English language class is offered as an interdisciplinary activity. So I had students from the postgraduate program of cognition and language, political sciences, social, political, engineering in general. So everyone could discuss the topic and bring that to their own context. So it was really relevant. And for us to finish, I have here some references that I used. All of them are excellent references in the area. And I really want to point out that everything that I told to you has to do with what Paulo Freire says, that we should bring the reality to the language classroom, because it is education is not meaningful if reality is not in it. So that's what Pedagogia da Autonomia says, and this is something that I have tried to apply in my lessons, to implement in my lessons, whatever I teach. So thank you so much for this opportunity to share my work. If you have any questions, I'm gonna try to open here the manuals that the students produce while you talk to me here, okay? Thank you.
Thank you
There
very
is a
much,
question by
Joyce.
Gustavo. Yes.
I think she's already talked about that one.
Okay. Oh, so I missed it.
Oh, I'm happy for that, Bonnie. Thank you. Thank you so much. If you want to know more about that project, it's published in the New Roads magazine, which is an ELT magazine here in Brazil. And you can just scan the code. Let me show it to you here. Or I can share the link. I think it's going to be easier. Just a second, please. I can share the link here, and then you can access it. It's on page 26. Okay. And myself and a friend who was a doctorate student, she is actually in it right now. We're trying to think about a book for us to publish with these practices. So maybe soon you can see a book about these projects that we have developed there at the university. We have talked about anti-racism, fake news, women in science, which was a really, really, really cool project that we developed with students. They, at the end of the project, as an end product, they interviewed professors at the university, people that they look up to, and it was really, really nice. I got really inspired by their presentations. Also, we talked about academic literacy, which is really important for them, and they could do tasks related to situations that they face, like they had to analyze abstracts and approve them or not, and justify their choices. then they had to write abstracts to present in a conference. So that result was really nice because many of the students told me after that that was the first time they learned how to write an abstract, because they usually have to pay for someone to translate it for them, so they could feel empowered to write their own abstracts. And it was really rewarding. So we are really thinking about putting all of this on a paper and share them with other people.
Please do, please do. I'm really looking forward to this.
Thank you. Well, in case you want to know more about the manuals, because I really can't find them now here, you just contact me and I'll be very happy to share them with you, right? This is my Instagram. I can share my email here as well. And I'll be very happy to be in touch with you.
Thank you very much, Joyce, for your lovely presentation. Can I just ask a question about your students' response when you implemented the project? Was the response like initially positive? Were they interested in from the get-go, or because I know the topic and now like thinking about how polarized Brazil has been politically, so was that an issue at all, or were they excited like from the get-go, or was there any kind of convincing and persuading you had to do to get them involved? So how did that work?
Excellent question, Marcus. No, they weren't engaged from the beginning, but I was kind of like mineirinhos, you know, comendo pelas beiradas, like we say in Portuguese. And just like I said, the Jessica, the student that I mentioned here, she was a Black woman and she was a researcher on the topic, and I could see doubts. And it was not only her, right? Especially because I am not Black, right? So then I think that the most significant thing here was giving them voice for them to share what they think about the topic. So everyone started feeling more comfortable with my proposal.
And can I ask another question?
Sure, sure.
Because you mentioned Djamila Ribeiro's book, which was part of the material you used as background for the project itself. And did students have access to the material in Portuguese? Was that, or did you translate part of it into English, or was it just some of the ideas you chose like from the book to discuss in class? How did that go?
Yeah, I picked some ideas from the book and put them in English, because not only them, not all of them could buy the book. So I used slides, right? And then articles by other authors that I used together.
Awesome, thanks. And does anyone have any other questions for Joyce or comments?
The question I asked, she already answered, so no more questions.
Happy to see you here, Gustavo.
Yeah, happy to see you too, Joyce.
So no more questions then? Okay, so Joyce, once again, thank you very much for this brilliant talk. I think the idea of conducting projects has become more fashionable, I'm going to say, of late. And it's really nice to see a project such as the one you described, which was so inspiring. And I'm really looking forward to the publication of the book you mentioned. I do hope it comes out soon. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And I'll be posting, so for everyone else attending the session, so I'll be posting a couple of links in the chat box. Okay.